Have you ever stopped to think about the oddly restrictive rules society has placed on what should be allowed to be depicted in video games, and how different the expectations are from other forms of media like movies or books? There's a real double standard at play here, and I haven't really seen much discourse on the stark contrast between what we deem acceptable in traditional versus interactive media. In this video, I want to bring attention to this frustrating attitude towards gaming as a whole and explain why I think it's a little ridiculous. Picture the following hypothetical. An R-rated movie marketed towards adults depicts the protagonist killing a child. What would you expect society's reaction to be? Crickets, right? Not a significant amount of people would demand the movie be banned, no theaters would refuse to screen it, and Walmart wouldn't refuse to carry the Blu-ray version afterwards. Okay, how about a romance book that's marketed towards adults and describes sexual encounters between consenting adult characters? Does society delve into moral panic? Are soccer moms threatening the book's publisher? No. They'd be lining up at the nearest Walgreens to pick themselves up a copy. It could even make the New York Times bestseller list. Finally, a big picture AAA video game that is clearly made for mature audiences and dares to include either of the examples of content that I just mentioned. What would happen differently? Well, first of all, it would receive the dreaded AO rating from the ESRB, at least in North America. In other parts of the world, it would receive an equivalent classification. Despite this AO rating stating that it only applies to people who are 12 months older than the M rating is meant for, 18 years old, all major retailers like GameStop and Walmart have policies that state they will refuse to carry any game that is given this rating. All of the big three console manufacturers also refuse to allow AO games on their digital storefronts. Given the immense cost to develop a game in the first place, publishers are forced to placate the ESRB, which acts as a form of all-powerful gatekeeper, possessing the discretion to force developers to go back and tone down parts of their art because a group of boardroom boomers thinks it's too risque, even for grown adults. In late 1993, and then again in the spring of '94, members of the combined United States Senate Committees on Governmental Affairs and the Judiciary held a congressional hearing with several spokespersons for companies in the video game industry, including Nintendo and Sega, involving violence in video games and the perceived impacts on children. The American public was afraid of three particular games that had recently released, namely Doom, Mortal Kombat, and Night Trap. Despite these titles clearly marketing themselves towards adults, moral panic ensued and emotions trumped reason, as it usually does in Congress. Night Trap in particular was similarly brought up in the United Kingdom, with questions being raised in their parliament, though I struggle to believe anyone did their homework beforehand. According to journalist Stephen Kent, reading the transcripts of the 1993 hearings, it is hard to believe that anybody had ever actually played Night Trap. Few people bothered to acknowledge that the goal of Night Trap was not to kill women, but to save them from vampires. Players did not even kill the vampires, they simply trapped them in Rube Goldberg-like booby traps. Nearly everyone who referred to Night Trap mentioned a scene in which a girl in a rather modest teddy is caught by vampires and killed. The scene was meant to show players that they had lost and allowed too many vampires into the house. Jeremy Parrish of OneUp.com noted that its game objectives were mischaracterized either through ignorance or deliberate obfuscation, transforming it from a bland and barely titillating FMV adventure to child-corrupting sexual boogeymen. The leader of the hearings, Senator Joe Lieberman, would admit years later that although he was proud of the formation of the ESRB as a result of the hearings, quote, The rating system has not stopped game producers from putting out some very violent games. At the time of writing this script, we're a week out from the newest Mortal Kombat game, and I think it would be hilarious to see this decrepit geriatric's reaction to the newest fatalities. If you were paying attention to gaming culture in the mid-2000s, you'll certainly remember this man's face, Jack Thompson. In the 90s, he was busy trying to ban various rap albums on the basis of them violating Florida's obscenity laws. Unfortunately, this goober would later turn his attention to video games, notably describing the proliferation of games from Sony, a Japanese company, quote, Pearl Harbor 2. He's most famous for going after Rockstar Games for their Grand Theft Auto series, against whom he was involved in lawsuits in the state of Ohio, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, and New Mexico. Honestly, this guy's a goldmine of insane quotes and interviews, and if you're into that kind of thing, there's a massive rabbit hole for you to delve into there. Around the same time, the first Mass Effect game was alleged on Fox News to feature full nudity and graphic depictions of sex, neither of which is remotely true and would have taken all of 5 minutes to verify. The common theme here is that older generations see a form of entertainment that they themselves don't engage with, decide that because it's not what they're used to doing for fun, it's either inferior or somehow dangerous, and then construct a narrative to fit that notion. Even today, 30 years after those early 90s hearings, there's still the perception that all video games are for children, and are something like a toy that they'll grow out of, despite they themselves not growing out of movies or fictional books. The average age of a gamer is actually 35 years old, by the way. To this day, the entire industry is bound by the arbitrary, unclear rules set forth by the ESRB. Even if you live in a different country, or the game is developed outside of the United States, the US market is so big that publishers are forced to bend the knee. I find it very ironic that a country that never stops talking about its freedom of expression has effectively neutered an entire art form's ability to express itself. Sure, it isn't illegal, but to ensure that a project is snuffed out financially is just as effective as outright banning it. Right now, the only unfiltered avenue for games is independent releases on PC from smaller devs that don't need to sell 10 million units to turn a profit. Steam is notably the only major digital store that has an open policy on violence and nudity. Maybe someday we'll have a version of Skyrim that lets us kill the kids without having to mod it in first. Here's hoping. As always, I'm curious to hear what you think. Is this something you ever think about? Let me know down in the comments. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean a lot to me. My goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers, and when I do, I'm going to do a full game room tour you won't want to miss. Until next time, thanks for watching.